Steve, how are you?
I'm really good.
Good. Welcome. Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
So you've been, we're going to talk about retail media today, and you've been pretty much every side of what we now know as retail media before it was even known as retail media. So could you maybe sort of talk about where your career kicked off for us, please?
Well, you can tell from the grey hair and glasses, I've been at it a long time. I actually started off at Procter & Gamble.
Right.
And I was 10 years as a graduate through to a sales director when I left, and did most of what there was to do in those days, working with small and major retailers. Actually, I led the Asda business for Procter & Gamble. And then I joined Pepsi as sales director for the UK, and I became general manager for the business in Ireland. Again, always working with retailers, launching brands. We launched Pepsi Max back in the day, and also Lipton Ice, for example. And then I became a general manager at Barilla, the big Italian food company. So the first half of my career really has been all about brands. And then I got the chance to join dunnhumby. And then that opened up the whole new world of data, loyalty, and of course, retail media. I had a stint with BCG after dunnhumby. And then for the last 12 years, I've been running SG Retail.
Excellent. Okay. And what did you do at dunnhumby? I think you had quite a pioneering piece of work that was sort of going on at dunnhumby, right, in terms of how we understand retail media today.
Well, back in 2000, dunnhumby had been working with Tesco for about 5 years since the launch of Clubcard. And I actually got hired originally to launch what was going to be a joint venture. It was going to be 50% owned by Tesco, 50% by dunnhumby. And the task was to monetize Clubcard. And then Tesco said, actually, we're not allowed to do that legally unless dunnhumby, you are a subsidiary. So that led to Tesco acquiring majority, 53% of the dunnhumby shares. And so I was leading, in effect, a startup within dunnhumby, and the task was to monetize Clubcard data. And I probably can claim the credit for moving dunnhumby into the world of media, because I could see that as Tesco were launching the Clubcard statement and different ways they had to communicate to customers, there was going to be this huge opportunity for brands to participate in that. And it made sense to me that the targeting and the analytics that we were responsible for melded with the client management and the selling aspect. And logically, we should do the selling. But we had to persuade firstly the dunnhumby founders and then Tesco that this data company should become a media company. But we did, and to a degree, the rest is history. I mean, we found that brands will spend so much on finding things out through analytics and data science, but they will spend way more on activating that and to drive growth. So the money was actually always in media, and we had a huge success with pioneering probably the world's first advanced retail media network, although we didn't call it that back in the day, but it's become the template, certainly for Kroger in the US, where we had a joint venture, and I was on the board of that, and that's given birth to 8451, one of the most admired retail media networks in the US and many other retailers around the world. So it's still unfolding and playing out.
Yeah. So when did we stop? What did you call it initially? If retail media wasn't the badge, what was it called? How did you describe it?
We didn't really have a name for it. It was always the difficulty. And I remember, post dunnhumby, and as I got into setting up my own business, sort of knocking on the doors of retailers and saying, well, look, we can do all of these things with your data and helping you to monetize that. And because there was never a name, it was actually quite difficult. There was those businesses that kind of understood it, perhaps those with the big loyalty programs who had seen what Tesco were doing with Clubcard. But the next level down, you were kind of often met with blank stares. So it was really in the last, I guess 6 or 7 years that retail media has been kind of given a proper brand, a proper name. And that was really driven by Amazon. Pioneering sponsored product ads. And when they revealed to their shareholders and therefore the world how much they were making, I think sort of 30 or 40 billion was the first time that they declared that, and now it's well over 60 billion from selling these sponsored product ads. That kind of shareholders around the world sort of started knocking on the doors of the CEOs and leadership teams to say, hey, what are we doing in this space? And retail media has really hugely accelerated in the last 5 or 6 years because of that.
Okay. Just out of interest, your job at dunnhumby was initially, you said, to monetize Clubcard. Before you had the idea of linking the data and the analytics to media, what was the first idea on how you would do that? How were you going to monetize Clubcard before you came up with essentially the first retail media network?
What Tesco and dunnhumby, in effect, had created with Clubcard was certainly the UK's biggest customer panel, because there were, I think back in the day, somewhere between 12 and 15 million people who actively shopped at Tesco and swiped their card and allowed Tesco to understand not just what products were selling in what stores at what frequency, but which customers were buying those products and what else were those customers buying and how frequently were those customers shopping. And it allowed them to understand huge amounts about those customers' life stages and family size and single person homes, big families, etc., and their lifestyle. What type of food shopper were they? So it was an incredibly rich data asset, and there was no other data solution like that. And there's always been a big market for data, whether that's research or market data. So we felt that we could monetize that. Nobody knew how big it was going to be. And interestingly, it took us, I think, about 10 months to make our first sale, because it was a big lesson, actually, in innovation. I mean, I joined the business because I could see, I originally went there as a supplier to say, can I have that data? I can see how valuable it would be. But we got a lot of resistance because people would say, well, that's just Tesco data, and we have other customer panels that give us a bigger market view. But after a while, people started to click that they could see and learn so many things because of the size and the richness of the panel that we started to take a market share.
Okay, interesting. So retail media, I think it's kind of a bit of an inflection point, as far as I can tell. As you know, I've had a lot of different guests that working in retail media that have been on the podcast, and if I triangulate what they're all telling me, it feels like we're going a little bit from purely retailer centric activity to more maybe omni-channel activity, where the data is kind of the single point of truth, if you like, and then you can buy outdoor, CTV, whatever it might be, to kind of do what Tesco's call from sofa to store advertising, build the mental availability and the awareness and the consideration while people sat at home watching Netflix or whatever, maybe catch them again when they're on the shopper journey, like with the out of home on the way to the store. And then you've got the sort of traditional, if you like, or the legacy retail media, which is the in-store stuff. So how much of retail media today do you see being purely what might be called shopper marketing versus what I've just described as that sort of sofa to store, that full funnel journey of awareness, consideration, and eventually purchase?
I think it varies hugely by retailer, but in effect, what you've described are the different channels. And obviously, in the early days, the key channel was the shop and the physical store, and that gave birth to trade marketing, shopper marketing, retail media by any other name. And ever since there's been shops, brands have wanted to advertise in and around them. So that was, I guess, stage one. Stage two was probably what we pioneered at dunnhumby, which was the integration of customer data, the ability to create a closed loop, the ability to do personalized marketing, whether that was couponing or other content. Stage three, then, I think, and the explosion was on site, and how Amazon, inspired by Google, but pioneered sponsored product ads. So these are the ads that appear when you search, and their big insight was when people shop with us, they don't know what they want. They will type in a subcategory, they'll type in trainers, and we don't really care what trainers we sell as long as we sell trainers. But Adidas and Under Armour and Nike, they care a lot, and so if we can get these guys to bid to have their products served, dependent on the data and the insights we have about the customer, that should be a big thing. And that's been a huge thing. And so that's kind of on site. And then we've got the kind of the coming together of those sort of ad serving techniques, a little bit driven by tech, but also the combination of the loyalty and the first party data that retailers have, and a kind of a recognition that brand like Tesco can understand or help an advertiser to serve an ad when one of their customers is browsing social media or is on a website or is watching TV. And to a degree, that is also inspired by Amazon, who've evolved from sponsored product ads to integrating their ad tech with Prime and their TV channels. So you've got this sort of almost expansion into every media channel that there is. And if you think about it, a big retailer can offer outdoor in their car parks and entrances to the store. They've obviously got on-site. They can use their data for off-site media, connected TV, social media, open web, and obviously they've got inside their stores. And no other media offers that sort of richness. And of course, no other media has the ability to join it all up with very, very granular sales purchase data on a per store basis, linked to a knowledge of what the customer is actually buying, informed by what ad choices were served. I mean, it's an incredible opportunity for big retailers.
Yeah. Well, if I was a CMO, the thing I'd be most excited about, and I don't even eat Kellogg's cornflakes, but I don't know why I keep coming to this brand, but it just feels like a really good FMCG brand to use as an example. But if I was working with Tesco, let's say, because we're talking about dunnhumby, I can get data of people that buy breakfast cereal but don't buy Kellogg's cornflakes. I can then target them away from home to start building mental availability with that audience that I know shop in Tesco's, and I know they go to the cereal aisle and they buy cereal but they don't buy Kellogg's cornflakes. I can then slowly but surely you sort of reach them as they get closer and closer to the store, and then do all of that in store, in the car park, as you mentioned, in store, in the aisle. And then I can see if I got more customers out of it. So if you did half the country, just a very crude A/B test, if you did half the country where you did that sort of branding, they would call it, I guess, and then half the country where you didn't, and then just see if there's a sales uplift. But I know you that's the way my sort of simple brain thinks about how you could measure how brand has had an effect on sales. But I know you're a big fan of Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow, and kind of combining mental availability and physical availability. Easy for me to say. So how do you think retailers should be thinking about that? Because that's not something that's come up so much in the conversations I've had today.
Yeah, I mean, the science on it is settled that brands grow by acquiring new customers. That's really one of the big insights from their research. And whether the brand is Tesco, Aldi, Lidl, whether it's a retail brand or whether it's Kellogg's or Head and Shoulders or any brand, it's always the brand with the most customers in any category that has the highest loyalty, that has the most customers, that is the biggest. And therefore, the only way to grow is to acquire new customers. So I think that is broadly understood, although you'd be surprised. Perhaps come back to that. And then if you get under the skin of, okay, well, what then causes somebody to buy a brand for the first time? How do you drive new customers? How do you get new customers? Then it is the combination of physical availability. And what do we mean by that? So if you're a retailer, the biggest thing you can do to grow is open more shops. Or if you're pure play online, to make sure that you've got incredible reach and visibility. And that's physical availability. And if you're a brand that gets sold in a shop, then you have to make sure that you've got presence, distribution, that you are visible when the customer makes their choice. That's far and away the most important thing that you can do. And then, of course, you've got mental availability, which is you have to kind of constantly drive awareness, drive distinctiveness, be in the kind of the headspace, the memorableness when the customer is about to make their purchase. But of course, that purchase is going to be inside a shop. So it links back to the physical availability. And one of the things that the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, pains to point out is the two things have to work together. It's self-evident when you think about it. You would never advertise in a market where you don't have any physical distribution. The first thing you would do is to drive and create physical availability. But once you've got that, you can then drive the mental availability, and it's the combination of these two things working together that creates brand growth. And what retailers and retail media has is the combination of those two things. No other media can do that. That's the incredible, I think, power of it.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most retail media campaigns at the moment are measured by, we did some activity and then sales went up. But I think you think that's not the right thing to be measuring, right? Based on your last answer, you should be measuring net new customers, not just existing customers. Otherwise, you're paying for sales that may have already happened.
If you look at how it works, if you take the really big advertising CPG companies, the Unilevers, the Procter & Gambles, on and on they go, Coke, Nestle, they've got sort of two broad functions within their business. The commercial teams that interface with retailers and spend big sums of money on retail media. And then they've got their brand and their agency teams that typically have spent their money in other media channels, TV, outdoor, etc., but increasingly are coming into the world of retail as sponsored product ads initially, but they're understanding that they can drive incredible growth through that channel. But they look at the same activity completely differently. So the commercial teams would look for a sales uplift. And it's almost as simple as that. If I did this activity and my sales went up, it was good. And if I did it and it didn't, it wasn't so good. But the media and the brand teams never look for that because they never could. If you advertise on TV or on the side of a bus or in a football stadium, you had no idea if your sales went up or not. And so they didn't even try to measure that. They looked for, am I delivering impressions to a certain audience at a certain frequency? And so both of them in interface with retail media within the same company look at the world completely differently. And then arguably, neither of them are looking at it from the science of how do brands grow. But I think it's going to come. Logically, they'll get there. But what they really should be measuring, exactly as you say, is, am I acquiring new customers? And to what extent am I driving and improving my physical availability? And they kind of understand that. The commercial teams understand we need distribution, we need presence, we need shelf space, we need to be on the digital shelf, we need to be visible constantly. And am I driving mental availability? And again, the marketing media teams understand that concept, but they don't work holistically, and neither actually measures, very, very rarely measures the new customer element. And that's typically been because they've not been able to. But of course, with retailer loyalty data, they can. And even if they would argue that, well, I can only see that within that retailer, there are techniques that would allow them to measure that across the entirety of the retailer base within a geography. So it tends to get measured in most brands by the marketing teams at a national level. We would argue that they should be measuring that at a retailer level, and I think we're going to see that coming. But right now, that's not how they do it.
What do they need to do in order to? Because exactly as you just described there, you've got the media agencies and brand teams measuring something quite different to the commercial teams. What needs to happen, and is it even likely? But what needs to happen in order for them to start working from top to bottom, looking at the same data, the same results, the same planning? Like, what do you think needs to happen?
It's kind of organizational change, because the interesting thing is, if you take the science from How Brands Grow, Ehrenberg Bass, they are sponsored by about 40 or 50 of the world's biggest consumer brands. So, absolutely intellectually, this is understood, but it tends to be understood at a very senior level within the business. It hasn't really diffused. So the first thing is they have to kind of educate internally the science of how brands grow is number one. And then secondly, they have to bring together the measures that they mostly do have. They have some sort of measure of physical availability that's typically measured, but it's measured within the commercial silo. And then the measures around mental availability, which is also measured, but it's measured within the brand or the agency silo. They have to bring those two things together, but they have to join that up with the retailer data that informs which of those components, which of those elements is working the most to drive new users. You can get that from the retailer. And you're not going to see that at an individual campaign, but you are going to see it over a period of time with multiple campaigns to the same audience linked to driving your physical availability. And then they can correlate that with consumer panel data to see, okay, I'm winning new customers in Tesco. Are they completely new to my brand? Yeah, most of them are actually, although some of them seem to have come in from another retail channel, for example. And there's innovations in data science and the retailer's ability to give very, very granular data on a per store basis that allows you to get under the skin of that.
So I'm not a CMO, obviously, but if I was, I would be thinking I'm probably the one that understands how brands grow at an intellectual level because of the sort of seniority and the fact that it's kind of almost like the Bible for B2C marketers. Mm-hmm. Yet one of my big challenges is proving to the rest of the board how marketing is driving new sales. So that idea of sofa to store and basically building an audience segment of people that are likely to buy my product but aren't at the moment, and then subjecting them to a campaign of brand advertising and then seeing sales uplift over time would seem to me like an amazing opportunity to be able to show internally we spent this much money on brand, and in the areas that we did that, sales went up by 5%, let's say, or 10%, versus those areas we didn't do that in, where sales didn't go up or flat, or maybe even went down. And then you've got empirical evidence, this kind of talking to the CFO, talking to the CEO, talking their language, not impressions and click-through rates and stuff like that. No one cares about that. I've never seen a CEO on an earnings call say we got an amazing click-through rate. It doesn't seem to happen, does it? So do you think we'll end up at a point, and when Dean Harris came on from Co-op, when he came onto the podcast, he asked the question, like slightly mischievously, like, is the most important word retail or is it media? And do you think we're going to get to the point where this is just going to be media? It's going to be traded alongside all other media and it'll just be another media offering, or do you not think that's going to be the case?
Well, I mean, there's a lot in what you've just asked, but how do brands grow? They grow through physical availability, that is retail.
Yeah.
And mental availability, that is media in simple terms. And so it's always both. And that's the unique thing about retail media. No other media can do that. So that's sort of thought number one. Then there's, to your earlier point, there's always been and always will be huge tension between the kind of the finance, show me the immediate results, how do we know that this marketing media spend is working, and the commercial teams with a kind of responsibility to answer that. And what's happened over the years is the media and marketing teams have pioneered what they would call media mix modeling. So a kind of data science attempt to unpick whether the spend on radio versus TV versus online is working, and to what extent can we see that over time that is it's working. And most of the big CPGs would use MMM to inform media choices and to have some sort of sense of, is it working? Are the media choices working or not? The problem is that those studies have typically, and still do, work on quite small sample sizes, and they only look at media, and they're quite slow, and you only do it once a year. It's very, very expensive. And it's only one part of how brands grow.
It's also a lagging indicator.
It's a lagging indicator of mental availability. What most of them are not yet doing is applying the same techniques to physical availability, and then bringing those two things together to say, actually, what we really need to unpick is whether it's our in-store activity, whether it's our mental availability, or our physical availability that is having the bigger impact than our mental availability. How are those two things working in combination, and how are they working in combination within a retailer in order to drive new users, in order to drive growth? That's where we're heading.
Okay.
And what's exciting is that there's the data to do that, and there's the data science to do that. And I'm certain that that's where we're heading as an industry, and that's big news for the retailers.
Okay. So if I think back to my days at the Telegraph, I was working on mobile advertising when it was very, very new. It was before programmatic advertising. And so for advertisers to do a deal with the Telegraph, they had to come to us directly. They had to talk about the assets that we had. They had to sign an IO, then send us the creative, and then get reporting. And they had to do that with us. Then they'd go to the Guardian, then they'd go to the Independent. So it's a very labor-intensive job. It feels like because retail media is super new, we've kind of got the similar idea. If you want to do a retail media campaign, first you go to Tesco's, then you go to Sainsbury's, then you go to Co-op, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think we're going to get to the stage where there will be a platform above all of the retailers where a brand can plug in and create an in-store, out-of-home CTV campaign holistically across all retailers? Absolutely.
We're heading there very, very quickly. There are some tools that have evolved out of the Amazon world and have said, okay, well, we can apply the way that we work with Amazon to the on-site sponsored product ads of other supermarkets, and they're having some success. And then there's tools like Trifecta, which is sort of built from the ground up to integrate across the ad tech that all retailers use. And these tools are new, but they would solve exactly the problem that you're describing, which is how do I centrally book and analyze and plan and optimize my media across all the retailers in the market at the same time, and then I can optimize my spend between them based on how they're working. Absolutely, we are we're here actually. That is doable. Very few people are doing it, but it is absolutely doable now.
Okay. So in terms of innovation in retail media, what are you excited about today, and what do you think is coming down the line for tomorrow?
Well, there's been massive innovation. The last 5 or 6 years have been dominated by on-site ad tech and moving into off-site ad tech, and that's going to evolve. One of the areas that we're most excited about at the moment actually is at the individual store level. There's a new solution, new technology that we've seen that allows retailers to create social channels, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, at a per store level, which nobody does at the moment. All social media is managed centrally.
Yeah. So Tesco's Epsom would get their own social channel.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay.
And exactly that. And the big benefits of doing that are the algorithms prioritize localness is the biggest driver of relevance is, localness, number one.
And also it's an interest graph now, isn't it, rather than who you follow. So if you're constantly talking about Epsom, you're going to show up in more news feeds because it feels more relevant to the people that are in Epsom on Facebook or wherever they may be.
Yeah, if Tesco serve their national social media content, which they do, there will be some people in Epsom that will get that, particularly if they're following Tesco. But the vast majority won't. But if the same content comes from the Tesco store in Epsom, then the number of people in Epsom who see that will be off the charts higher. Now, if you then multiply the impact of that times the 2,000 or 3,000 Tesco stores that there are in the UK, then that audience will be 5 or 6 times larger than Tesco are able to achieve nationally. And that is a big thing, number one, but it creates a huge retail media opportunity off the back of it, number two. And I think Unilever recently declared that they are spending not far off half of the entire media budget is going on social.
And influencers.
And influence. And then if you look at the world's biggest omnichannel retailer, Walmart, they have had massive success with these local social channels and then building an influence-led business off the back of that. So that none of that has hit Europe yet. We think that's coming, and I think that's going to be a really interesting space.
I was quite excited about the Unilever announcement about putting all that money into influencers, because every 7.5 years since we launched Six Sales, we've been banging the drum that people pay more attention to people than brands.
Right.
And now they're realizing that that's the world that we live in. Influencers, creators, they get far more attention than brands. So to start delivering through creators that are relevant, and you start getting more. I think this
is a big untapped area for retail media generally, and I think that's absolutely going to come. And it's been impossible to do what I've described because just the manpower would have, and the governance would have just been too time and labor intensive. But it's an area that AI is enabling that to happen.
Do you think we'll get to the stage you'll get local influencers? So Tesco in their 3,500 stores, each of them have their own local influencers that are known in the local communities.
I mean, without that's what's happened that's what Walmart have pioneered.
Right.
And I think without a doubt we're heading that way. We're just not there yet.
Yeah.
And then the other area of really interesting innovation is sponsored products, and it's still the case that very few brands properly understand how powerful that is, because what a sponsored product does is allow you to be visible to somebody who's about to buy in your category, but they haven't chosen their brand. And if you analyze shopping data and you look at how people shop, they shop by subcategory. They will type in shampoo, loo roll. They very, very rarely will type in the brands. Sometimes they do, but very, very rarely. And so to be able to serve an ad right at that moment does two things. Firstly, it drives your physical availability. This is the big thing. It makes you visible, whereas most brands will have been invisible on that search, because there might be 500 or 600. It's probably over 1,000 breakfast cereal, to your Kellogg's point, within the breakfast cereal categories of most supermarkets. So most brands are going to be completely invisible. No physical availability most of the time when most people shop. But a sponsored product ad solves the physical availability problem, number one. But it also, of course, drives mental availability, because it's a cue, it's a prompt. There's the distinctiveness.
It's contextually relevant to what you're looking for at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then you've got the ability to bid programmatically and to bid on certain audience types. And you can say, I want to bid on people who've never bought Kellogg's, or people who always buy Kellogg's, or buy a certain type of cereal or a certain family size. All of this is available from within the data. So from the brand's point of view, it's probably the most impactful media that there is. Almost if you were starting from scratch, that's probably the first thing you would do is sponsored product ads in every retailer, number one. And then big innovation in the retailer side of how you get the balance right between, okay, so I can see these ads are very, very powerful and very profitable, but I don't want to just keep showing Kellogg's just because Kellogg's are paying a load of money, because I've got to think about the customer experience. And it's pretty obvious to me that this customer who's just typed in breakfast cereal doesn't want Kellogg's. They want some, I don't know, other brand choices. So they've got to get the customer experience right. A lot of innovation in the technology that can understand the search term, can understand the shopping history of the customer, and can bring in flexibility as to where you can serve an ad in the grid of whether that's on your mobile phone or...
That's also a commercial imperative for the retailer, right? Because there's no point in keep showing kilos, because if you don't click, you don't get paid. So like, if you can understand the shopping basket and realize that's probably not the product that's going to get the click, but that one might do, then it makes sense for the retailer to show the right ad.
Yeah, it's basically an optimization problem. It's how do you optimize that the brands who wouldn't get shown want to be shown, and they want physical availability. How do you optimize giving the customer the perfect selection for them to choose from? Also, how do you optimize from a retailer profitability point? How do you optimize all of that? And there's a lot of innovation now in that space that allows retailers to get that balance right.
So I've got a question for you then. So I'm searching for football boots, and I get a sponsored ad for Nike Tiempo, but I ended up buying Adidas Predators, let's say. So that's physical availability for Tesco, for Nike. Sorry, got Tesco on the brain now. And it's mental availability because it's a contextual ad at the right time while I'm thinking about football boots. But I don't go ahead and click and buy Nike. I ended up buying Adidas. How do we measure the effectiveness of that ad, that sponsored ad that I didn't click, in terms of physical availability and mental availability? Because it still had a benefit to the brand, but because nobody clicked, it doesn't get measured, right, currently?
It's all measurable. Whether people are asking for it to be measured and using the measurement is a different thing. But where you appear on the grid against a certain search term, that's highly measurable. Retailers know that, and in some cases, brands can understand that at a granular level on every shopping trip. So, and that has value, right? So physical availability, that drives new users. It's the most important thing that you can do. So you should be measuring that. And by measuring it, you can understand how important it is, and that should inform how valuable is it for you to be on the top row of an online shopping. Just like if you're not in JD Sports or Sports Direct, then there ain't many places that customers are going to go, or Amazon going to go to buy football boots. So you've got to be in those. You've got to be visible.
Yeah.
And that is measurable. And then obviously, then if somebody clicks through or not, that's also measurable. And did they see the ad? That's also measurable. How you join it all up, that's the task, really. And don't expect a single campaign to transform the number of new users, but equally, what you should be expecting is that the cumulative impact of those campaigns on the audience that's right for you will have an impact. And if it doesn't, there's probably something wrong with your proposition or your creative.
Yeah, because what I'm talking about there is that, like in the Nike Adidas example, effectively that Nike ad has been placed there because they want me to click and buy the Nike boots. But if I don't click and buy the Nike boots, that is now basically a brand ad. It's essentially it's trying to build mental availability in me for Nike boots. Okay. And I was speaking to Alex Knappman, your colleague at SG Retail, about this. People don't think about a lot of FMCG products very often. They probably think about them when they use them and when they buy them, right? And so
exactly.
When I was speaking to Nick Ashley at Tesco, he was saying that the in-aisle advertising, most brands think about that as direct response. You advertise in the aisle and then sales go up because it's in the aisle. But why couldn't that be a brand building opportunity?
It completely is brand building. Being in a supermarket and prominent on the shelf that is the biggest and most impactful brand building that you can do. If you don't do that, you have no brand. And the great evidence for this, of course, is the success of supermarket own label. Look at the brands sold by Aldi. Look at most of the own label brands sold in most supermarkets. They've got huge market shares. There's no advertising, but there's brand building. They're very distinct, recognizable, regularly purchased brands, and they're all built through physical availability. It's far and away the most important thing that you can do to build a brand. And then, of course, and they also drive mental availability because of the packaging, the distinctiveness, the colors, the familiarity. You recognize them, and obviously there's the proposition too. So that is brand building. And then the media, the advertising, the accelerating the mental availability side, that's almost like the icing on the cake. That's clearly very, very important too, but it's definitely secondary to the physical availability.
Okay, interesting. So I wanted to ask you about SG Retail. So maybe if I can ask you, firstly, how do SG Retail work with retailers? And then also, how do SG Retail work with brands? So a two-pronged question.
Yeah, most of our work is with retailers, and we help them on customer strategy. We help them with their customer data. We help them with their loyalty program design and optimization. And across the last few years, we've helped them a lot. And most of our work now is on retail media. How can they leverage all of those assets to build an effective retail media network that drives growth for them and their brands, as well as drive profits? And it's become a big area for us. We would advise on all aspects of setting up and optimizing a retail media network, starting with the strategy and its purpose and how it integrates with the commercial part of the business, how it integrates with retail, with e-com and marketing and financially. So into big piece around alignment, helping to think through and optimize the organization design. How are you going to do the sales and the client servicing? How are you going to do the ad ops? How are we going to leverage data? Big piece around technology, huge amounts of tech choices. How do you bring all of those together? All of those together to optimize? Where do you start? And we're working with retailers that are very early in the journey, through to some of the biggest retail media networks, certainly in Europe, on how to optimize what they have.
Okay, and with brands?
With brands, we're doing nowhere near as much as we'd like. As retail media's become more and more important for brands, we've got a lot to say, and we've got, I think, some very, very good techniques now that do the type of measuring that I was describing earlier, that we've proven with one or two very, very big players. But if I could wave a wand, we would be working with more brands than we currently are.
Okay. So if we were going to do a SWOT analysis of retail media where it is today, looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, maybe pick one for each quadrant. What would you say the big strength is? I think we've probably touched upon it, but I'm going to guess what you're going to say. But
yeah, well, I think it is its unique ability to drive brand growth, because it combines physical availability and mental availability. No other media channel does that. So I think its big strength, linked to the data that it has that allows you to optimize and understand that at a very, very granular level.
Okay, weakness?
Depends what you compare it to, but if you compare it as a media choice, the weakness of retail media is its reach. So one of the reasons why Facebook and Google have hoovered up so much of the world's advertising is because they can offer monumental reach, and that varies by retailer. Someone like Tesco can probably reach certainly half of the people in the country, but probably not all of them. So reach would be one of its weaknesses.
Okay, and opportunities?
Well, the opportunity is probably to solve the weakness. So how do you solve the reach weakness? It would be through offsite. And I think we will see not necessarily retailers collaborating themselves, but technology, in effect, creating aggregations of retailer audiences. And those technologies exist now. So I think that's an opportunity, is to how to broaden your audience through aggregation via technology.
Okay.
Would be definitely one of the opportunities. I think the other opportunity is to keep banging the drum about its uniqueness, which is not yet fully understood, we think, at senior enough levels within big advertisers.
Okay. And any threats?
I don't really think so. Some people say, "Oh, AI is going to disintermediate retailers," but if you think it through, it's going to be the reverse. You can't. An AI shopping agent acting on your or my behalf is going to need to kind of log in with your or my Nectar and Club card details, number one, and it's going to have a task of it's looking to optimize products, but it's also going to optimize on pricing and deals and many, many, many things. It will take a long time before either of us trust the agent to do that, but it will get there. But that will also give retailers a massive opportunity to influence that. Again, no other media will come near the retailer's ability to influence shopping agents. So I see that as a huge opportunity. Although some people see it as a threat, I think they're wrong. I don't see any huge threats. If you think about it, brands have always needed to and wanted to advertise in and around shops. So they're going to only stop doing that when there aren't any shops. But there's always going to be shops. So I think we're at the early stages of retail media, and it's going to get bigger and bigger.
Okay. So last question. If I was a retailer listening to this, and I'm not sure, let's just say I don't have a retail media network yet, and I'm thinking, should we have one? And if so, what should I do as first steps? How would you think about deciding whether you're the right type of retailer to have a retail media network first and foremost, and assuming you are the right type of retailer to have a retail media network, what would be the first steps other than call you, obviously?
I mean, it's certainly much easier to build a retail media business if you are selling products that are supplied by brands with advertising budgets. And that means supermarkets, health and beauty, drugstores, electronics. The products that they are selling are supplied by many of the world's biggest advertising companies. So there's big advertising spend to go after. That isn't the case in Uniqlo or IKEA, for example. Retailers that are selling own label. It's not to say they can't have a retail media business, but it's going to be much, much more difficult for a retailer of that type. So definitely branded retailers. The next thing that matters is the ad spend within the market and your size within that market. So, Tesco are always going to outperform on Iceland in the UK just because they're 15 or 20 times bigger. So size definitely matters. And then I think you've got to think through, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to drive profits? And that'll take you in a certain direction, or am I doing this to drive growth, and that will take you into another? And a lot of people get that wrong. We see a lot of the time, retailers follow the logic of, well, this is about bringing extra money in. I've kind of got my commercial teams to optimize that on the one hand. I need to check that this retail media thing is going to be incremental. I'll give it to another team over here, perhaps put that within marketing, and it absolutely sub-optimizes. So you've really got to think through how you integrate into the business. Really big thing.
Fabulous. Steve, really enjoyed that. Thanks so much for coming in. Much appreciated. Thanks for being on the podcast.
You're very welcome. Many thanks. Enjoyed it.